Hello and welcome. You tune into Market Cafe. I'm Ankita Saxena and with me is Ashesha Advario. In the next 1 hour, we'll take you through what transpired in the global markets and the cues you need to watch out for before the start of D Street today. Now, yesterday, Ashesha, we did see a sharp sell-off in the Indian markets. There was bloodbath. In fact, on the comments that are coming from US President Donald Trump on imposing tariffs on countries that do not support him in his Greenland escapade will face tariffs. And on the back of that, there has been a lot of global uncertainty, and that is leading to the fall in the market. In fact, yesterday for global markets, for US markets also, there was a sharp decline that came in. Dow slipped almost 870 points. That has been the sharpest fall since October for Dow Jones Industrial Average. In fact, that was down 1.8%. S&P 500 lost roughly 2.1%. A drawdown in tech stocks also led to a sell-off in the Nasdaq that slid almost 2.4% on the day. And all the three benchmark indices logged their worst daily performance since October 10th. And the sell-off also dragged the S&P 500 and Nasdaq into the negative territory for 2026. Now, the so-called, Sell America trade on Tuesday was accompanied by a spike in the US Treasury yields also and a decline in the dollar. And because the 10-year Treasury yield also spiked up briefly, that topped 4.3%. That was trading at the day's highs. The markets also saw a downtick of a cut of almost 2% as far as US markets are concerned. So that is how largely the US market shaped up. And if I look at the futures right now, they've ticked up slight bit, from the correction that we saw yesterday. 0.1% gains coming in Dow Jones. S&P 500 is added 0.1%, while Nasdaq is very, very marginally higher. So it's basically after the correction, we do see a little bit of buying that's coming in, but largely it's a negative day of trade that we are penciling in, Ashesha.
Well, yes, negative day of trade that we are penciling in, but let's also take a look at what the crude market and the oil market is doing this morning. Remember, it is now trading near that $64 per barrel mark. It is down 1.5% in trade yesterday and today, and Brent crude ended with a decline of with an uptick of nearly 1.5% in trade yesterday. Now, as you mentioned, US President Donald Trump's attempts to annex Greenland has sent jitters through wider markets, and that is precisely the reason we are seeing volatility not only across equity markets but in the oil market as well. Crude also continues to remain under pressure from expectations that supply is likely to outpace demand this year, and that is also one of the reasons we have seen a sharp fall in crude oil prices over the last few months, and that is perhaps likely to accelerate going forward as well. But one important data point to watch out for will be International Energy Agency's monthly outlook, which is set to be released later on Wednesday. So any kind of outlook and any kind of commentary on demand-supply dynamics from the oil market will be very crucial to watch out for. So yes, Ankita, Brent crude at that $64 per barrel mark.
All right, so that's how crude is faring. But let's move on. All eyes are going to be on Donald Trump's speech at the Davos tonight, where geopolitics is expected to remain in the spotlight amid his rhetoric over trade, tariffs and Greenland. But ahead of that, he held a press conference to commemorate 1 year of his return to the White House, said he has done more for NATO than anyone in the history, but questioned whether the alliance would defend the United States in return. Now, Trump warned that while Washington spends heavily to support NATO allies, it cannot assume the same commitment back. Let's listen in to what he had to say.
I did more for NATO than any other person alive or dead. Nobody's done for NATO. And I think for the most part, they'll tell you that. I think you could ask the Secretary General about that, but he said it a lot. I've done more for NATO than anybody, and I see all this stuff, but NATO has to treat us fairly, too. The big fear I have with NATO is we spend tremendous amounts of money with NATO. And I know we'll come to their rescue, but I just really do question whether or not they'll come to ours.
Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump also claimed that he helped avert a major escalation between India and Pakistan, saying tensions were close to turning nuclear. He also said that multiple aircrafts were shot down and credited his intervention with preventing large-scale loss of life, calling it part of his effort to end long-running global conflicts. Listen.
Ended 8 unendable wars in 10 months. These were unendable wars. Cambodia and Thailand fighting for years. Kosovo and Serbia. The Congo and Rwanda. Pakistan and India, they were really going at it. 8 planes shot down. They were going to go nuclear, in my opinion. The Prime Minister of Pakistan was here. And he said President Trump saved 10 million people and maybe much more than that. They're both nuclear countries. Israel and Iran, Egypt and Ethiopia were going to fight over a dam, and I got them to stop.
And well, he also said that he is uncertain how the Supreme Court will rule on his tariffs, warning that a loss could force the government to refund hundreds of billions of dollars already collected. Trump argued tariffs have boosted national security and government revenues and said repaying funds, if ordered, would be difficult without hurting people. Let's listen in.
We've taken in hundreds of billions of dollars, and if we lose that case, it's possible we're going to have to do the best we can in paying it back. I don't know how that's going to be done very easily without hurting a lot of people. But we're waiting for that case anxiously, and we have tremendous national security because of tariffs and tremendous income. You know, we have, and by the way, no inflation.
Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has blasted what he calls bullies at the World Economic Forum in Davos, urging the US to suspend tariffs on Europe. His remarks came after Trump threatened 200% tariffs on French wine over Greenland. Macron warned that the EU could be forced to deploy its anti-coercion instrument, calling such a scenario crazy, and argued that tariffs undermine stability, growth, and the rule of law.
And Danish pension fund is dumping U.S. treasuries, citing concerns over America's deteriorating public finances. The Accountiker Pay Pension says that it will sell around $100 million in the U.S. government bonds by the month end. The move comes amid rising geopolitical tensions over Greenland and follows a broader Sell America trade, with yields surging, stocks falling, and gold hitting record highs. Investors' fears are growing that the trade wars could spill into the capital wars.
And shifting focus then, US Senator Steve concludes India visit from January 17 to 19. He met with External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal, members of Parliament, and US and Indian business leaders. Discussions featured US-India defense cooperation, mutual efforts to secure supply chains, stable Indo-Pacific ties. Sumita Karir, my colleague, is now joining us with more details. Sumita?
That's right. U.S. Senator Steve Daines has just concluded his India visit from January 17th till 19th. He met with External Affairs Minister Dr. S. Jaishankar, the Minister of Commerce and Industry Piyush Goyal, along with members of Parliament and business members of the business community from Indian and United Nations businesses that are based in the U.S. In fact, Daines, amongst the several conversations that he'd had, he urged favorable pulse crop provisions in any future agreements between the United States and India, and he spoke with Indian leaders about that. In fact, in a quote that's been shared by the U.S. Embassy here in New Delhi, he stated that on behalf of Montana's pulse crop farmers, I appreciated Minister Goyal for listening to our farmers' concerns and will continue to work with President Trump to press this important priority. In fact, Senator Daines sought acceleration of the active and ongoing talks towards the conclusion of a fair and reciprocal bilateral trade deal. He also stated the discussions featured the U.S. and India defense cooperation, mutual efforts to secure supply chains, and of course asking for and trying for a stable Indo-Pacific. Later on, he spoke with representatives of the business community to highlight the many opportunities to deepen cooperation in advanced technologies and to expand trade and bilateral ties. Now, as far as the pulse crop provisions are concerned, this is a very, very important matter given the fact that it is concerning the agri community, and India has maintained very firm red lines as far as access to its agri, dairy and GM crop sectors is concerned. In fact, we've not opened this particular sector, for any of the partners with whom we've done any kind of trade deals or FTA. So this is a significant point that's been made by Senator Daines, and the fact that he communicated that to the Indian leaders as well. In fact, just a few days back, he had also written a letter urging President Trump to, of course, secure the interests of the farmers of the United States, particularly with respect to the state of Montana.
And